Hi and welcome to our 3-module presentation on the topic of teamwork. This is module 1 and it's all about what is teamwork, where does it come from, brief history, what goes on in the human brain when people are in a team environment. The second module is about recruiting for teamwork and the third is about leading for teamwork. So we're going to start off with a brief history of teamwork. Teamwork exists in all kinds of animals. These are pelicans, and what those pelicans are doing is that they are team fishing. They line up together, they herd the fish into a small area, and then all at once they stick their beaks in and capture the fish. That is an example of teamwork amongst birds. These are wolves, and wolves, we know, are extremely team orientated. The reason that these wolves are able to bring down a big animal like a bison is because of the way that they cooperate with each other. They are supportive of each other and they also adopt particular roles. We also know that wolves are extremely responsible leaders. So when a wolf becomes a pack leader, one of the things that they have to do to distinguish themselves is to be caring of and supportive of all of the other wolves, making sure that they're fed, making sure that they're safe, making sure that they're protected. Chimps. We can learn a lot from chimpanzees too. Chimpanzees have in-groups and they have out-groups, and in a group of chimpanzees, in a troop of chimpanzees, you will find multiple teams, not just one team. And there are chimps that like each other and chimps that don't like each other, and they form groups in this way. And that's very, very similar to human beings. In fact, there are around the world at various zoos, there are training programs where you observe chimps and you learn a lot about human beings by virtue of seeing how chimps interact with each other. And finally, human hunter-gatherers. Humans were almost all hunter-gatherers up to about 12,000 years ago, and it's really interesting if you look at the expansion of human beings across the world. One of the first things that you notice in the fossil record is a declining number of megafauna. So here we've got a mammoth in this picture, but the same applies pretty much across the world, that human beings, despite the fact that they were smaller than megafauna, were able to kill them off, and the reason was that they acted in teams. We take a psychological perspective. I am a psychologist, SACS is a psychological firm, and what we're going to do now is to talk about what happens psychologically when somebody's in a team. The first thing that we have to understand, a very simple concept, is social facilitation, which is to say when you get people and put them together in a group, of their very nature, they seem to perform better. So there have been stacks of studies where you get people sitting exams, for instance, by themselves or in a group. And if you get people to sit exams in a group, even though they don't interact with each other and tell each other the answers, they will do better than sitting by themselves. So social facilitation is a thing. And then it raises the question of why is there social facilitation? Some people say that it's evaluation apprehension. In other words, people are nervous about how their performance will be seen, so therefore they try harder. And the other theory is that it's simply a matter of increased drive, where people who are together with each other seem to intrinsically have higher levels of drive. But that's social facilitation. Humans also have an innate need to belong. Teamwork reinforces belonging. So human beings are social primates, and we know that social primates, not only do we need to belong, but we feel very bad if we don't belong. And if you think of bullying, it almost always lends itself to some form of exclusion, and so that is a very painful experience. Human beings need to belong. Another thing we know about teams is that there is an us and them effect. And the idea of this us and them effect is that we name ourselves, we name our team certain things to show that we belong, but other people don't belong. Teams often adopt certain language, terminology, which is our terminology, and it's inclusive of people who we want to be included, but also exclusive of people that we don't want to be included. And Yuval Noah Harari talked a lot about the idea of the way that human beings, in his famous book called Sapiens, he looked at the question of how human beings have come to be able to coordinate themselves in groups of over 100, which is basically unknown elsewhere in the world of animals. Yes, birds fly in huge flocks and fish school in thousands, but they don't coordinate, plan, and undertake strategic activities like human beings do. So Harari wanted to answer the question about why this happens, and he puts it down to what he calls myths. Now, what are myths? Myths are things that are not demonstrably, obviously, materially true, but they're true in a social sense. So a myth of a group is a rank, a title, There's nothing objective to say that this soldier is a sergeant. But once you make this soldier a sergeant, then that gives them a leadership authority, and it also causes them to be able to coordinate activities. And so those kinds of myths, and by the way, Harari also mentions things like philosophies, religions, money, all of those sorts of things are concepts that we share. These are concepts that have helped human beings to become very coordinated and planned in what we do. The neurology of teamwork is very closely related to the neurology of survival. So when people are in teams, they have threat and reward cues in their brains that are being processed virtually simultaneously. And these come into two categories: approach cues and avoid cues. And these neurological cues in effect prime how people are likely to behave. And so one of the things that we have in teams that distinguish teams is the concept of shared purpose. When people have shared purpose, this is a very significant neurological event. It's a significant neurological event where people's oxytocin, which is a chemical in the brain that makes us want to develop relationships with other people. People have often heard of the fight and flight response. The oxytocin response is what's known as the tend and befriend response. So survival can be about fighting other organisms, or about running away from them. But what about the idea of developing strong relationships and partnerships with them so that we can protect ourselves by being members of a social group? That's what oxytocin does. Other cohesion chemicals also happen, and these help build trust. And it also turns on the positive part of the limbic system. The limbic system is the part of the brain that processes emotions, and that provides an opportunity for creativity, lateral thinking, cooperation, and also preparedness to do difficult things. So SACS work demonstrates to us that if we're in a good team and we have shared purpose, we can do things that otherwise we wouldn't be able to do. And it also releases rewards chemicals like dopamine, which causes us to feel good about the fact that we have shared purpose. In addition to that, we know that teamwork is about behaviours. Now, people talk about corporate culture all the time, and corporate culture is often described as mission, vision, values, those kinds of things. That is simply wrong. It is not about abstract concepts. If you want to have an effective corporate culture, it is purely and simply about behaviours. Because you can have the most wonderful mission, vision, value statement in the world, but if people's behaviours are contrary to it, then you will have a bad corporate culture. Positive behaviours means positive corporate culture. Negative behaviours means negative corporate culture. So this diagram is a diagram from a fantastic article by Russo et al. All about the behaviours that have been found in a range of research around the world in terms of what makes effective teamwork behaviours. And so this is all about preparation of work accomplishment. And so it's things like having goals, it's things like having planning, it's things like having clear missions for the team. Then there's the question of work assessment behaviours. In other words, how do we assess whether we're making progress or not? Then there's all of these associated with task-related collaboration, which is coordination, cooperation, and information exchange. And then there's the question of preparedness of work accomplishment. And that's all about backing up behaviours, intra-team coaching where people coach each other, collaborative problem solving, and team practice motivation. So where people are motivated and motivate each other to achieve things. So they're all about regulation of team performance. And then there's a set of behaviours which are about management of the team maintenance. We know that good teams work hard to remain good teams. They actually do things to, in effect, work on the teaminess of teams. And so this is an example of the sort of behaviours that cause this to happen. So psychological support, where people are helping each other, where people are giving each other psychological rewards. And integrative conflict management. So when people are not getting along with each other, these are the behaviours of saying, hey, Mary and Joe, we need to work together to achieve this goal. So how about we put our differences aside and collaborate? So there are some really important behaviours. Now, in Module 3 of this program, we'll get into this in a little bit more detail because there are some behaviours which are shown to be very effective in causing teams to coalesce. I want to talk briefly about neurology, and this is a diagram that talks about new brain, old brain. This is a very old concept, originally posited by a neurologist called J.B. McLean back in the 50s, I think it was, but a long time ago. And McLean said that the human brain, in fact, had three mechanisms. But for practical purposes, new brain, old brain is what it comes down to. Now, the new brain, old brain divide is an important one for teamwork, because what I've told you about what Zach found about how the human brain operates with shared purpose, what he's talking about is a new brain environment. A new brain environment is the part of the brain that evolved most recently, and it's all about creativity, it's all about cooperation, it's all about strategy, it's all about planning. It can see the future. The old brain can't see the future. So in effect, team effectiveness is about new brain activity. So this is the old brain here, the inner part of the brain. And if you read the work of Daniel Kahneman, for instance, or you may have come across the book The Science of Fate in recent times, both of them deal with the question of how much takes place in human beings completely unconsciously. Well, the old brain is the driver of that. Now, the old brain also has the capacity for emotion. The new brain emotions tend to be things like positivity, collaboration, enthusiasm. The old brain behaviours, or the old brain emotions, tend to be things like anger, fear, and depression. Now, we need the old brain. The old brain keeps us alive. The old brain protects us from a whole bunch of different risks. But I'm going to say that good teamwork is based on a new brain perspective on life. Now, one of the other things that we know is that human beings' emotions are contagious. This is a slide from the world of autism, as a matter of fact, and it talks about two neural pathways. One is the mirror neuron system, and the whole idea of the mirror neuron system is mirror neurons are parts of the brain that cause us to be able to soak up the emotions of other people, in effect to empathize with them. So if you've ever been sad and you get into a group of happy people, you will find yourself happying up. And as well as that, if you're happy and you go into a group of sad or angry people, you might well find yourself taking on their emotions in a negative sense. That's the mirror neurons. You also may have had the experience of, let's say somebody's performing, a comedian or something like that, they're not going well and you're squirming inside. That's the mirror neurons as well. So the mirror neurons cause us to be able to soak up the emotions of other people, and that's a really important part of teamwork because we share our emotions. But also, there's another part of the neural equipment to do with mirror cells that's about social bonding and goal-directed behaviours. So all of these components here contribute to two things. One, the degree to which we soak up other people's emotions and therefore pursue their goals. So we also observe the behaviours of other people, and if their behaviours are collaborative, supportive and teamwork orientated, then we're far more likely to bond with them and to have high levels of team consciousness. But what about in the presence of internal team threats, things like uncooperative or hostile colleagues? Well, that will lead to an avoid response. It will turn on the old brain, it drains energy from the new brain. The strange truth about the human brain is that the two systems are very much intertwined with each other, new brain, old brain. And the brain is quite a unique device. It cannot soak up more information and energy from the rest of the body. So if you exercise your biceps, you will draw more energy from the rest of your body to fuel your biceps. But the human brain can't do that. It's protected because it's highly regulated in terms of its energy consumption. So the effect of that is that when one part of the brain is turned on, other parts of the brain are turned off. This is why if you're trying to make a speech and you'll be using the speech center of your brain, which is approximately here, that's a new brain function. And new brain functions tend to be higher energy consuming than old brain functions. Old brain functions happen largely unconsciously. But if you're trying to use your new brain function of your speech center, but your amygdala is turning on because you're very nervous and very stressed, then what will happen is that the energy will drain away from the speech center and go to the amygdala. And now if that happens, it makes it much harder to make a good speech. And that's one of the reasons I think people are fearful of public speaking. They intuitively know that this can happen and they can become much less articulate, purely and simply in the presence of nerves. You can also get this, by the way, from anger. I'm sure you may have seen somebody once who was inarticulate with anger. When energy is drained from the new brain, this also reduces cognitive performance. And Rock in 2008 demonstrated that this is very similar to giving away IQ points. If you're very nervous and stressed in the presence of, let's say, another person, this actually causes you to make worse decisions, as though you've lost some IQ points in that process. So what that means is that any individual who's joining a group, if it's got a prospect of turning into a team, they approach a forked pathway and they make a decision, usually unconsciously, can happen consciously, but the vast majority of times it happens unconsciously, to either collaborate and become part of the team and to invest in new brain behaviour, or to compete, to separate from the rest of the team and maybe even engage in hostility, old brain behaviour. Teamwork can therefore be demonstrated to be a significant neurological event. The brain works differently when we're part of an effective team. But it raises the question as to whether it has an effect on outcomes as well. And the answer seems to be an emphatic yes. When people are members of an effective team, they have higher levels of drive, higher levels of morale, higher levels of well-being. They are happier than being by themselves. But in addition, there's a significant payoff for the organisation. People who are members of effective teams are more productive in terms of quality and quantity of the work that they're able to produce. The next video in this sequence will be all about recruiting for team effectiveness, recruiting individuals who can contribute to the quality of team interactions. And the third in the sequence will be about how do leaders create more effective teamwork within the teams that they lead.